worked with Malcolm on carbon, but I thought it would be more interesting to talk about some of the other work, maybe, because there's a lot of people talking about carbon today. And I'd just like to start by saying what a pleasure it is. It's always been fun working with Malcolm. It's one of my, well, it's my scientific highlight of my life, I think, the things that we've done together. It's been for many years. This was PhD days back in Exeter. There's John. He's now heavily masked with his beard, but you can still just about recognise him. Paul Leary. This was the days when Malcolm was, well, I was doing my PhD in silicon, and I was be chatting to him about carbon, and he'd be starting to talk about SP2 and SP3, like I knew what he was talking about, and I thought, okay, maybe I should study this a little bit, and then he offered me a postdoc, and that's how I got sucked into carbon, and that's why I'm where I am now. And I went off backpack around the world, and Malcolm offered me a job again back in Sussex, postdocing. So this was my much more sartorial days when I was before I had to wear long trousers. But no, we did a lot of interesting work together. And this one I just wanted to put up because I think, ask any scientist if they have a whiteboard. It's a bit like desert island discs. If you have a whiteboard that you really remember, I think certainly for me, the whiteboard up on the top floor of the CPS corridor is where I really learned to be a scientist. And my fondest memories are standing around that whiteboard with Malcolm with the whiteboard pens. And it's not, for people who haven't done this, maybe they don't get it, but it's not a whiteboard, it's a doorway, like Alice, into another world. And with Malcolm, I felt he always had a very clear picture in his head of what was going on. He had a broad scientific base, and the difficulty was communicating it. So it was like building something together. So with those whiteboard pens, and with a limited vocabulary, and then later on with the bits of moddymod, we had of the floor covered in these little bits of plastics and balls, building structures, and it was all about trying to kind of build this castle in the air that was graphite together. And it was a fantastic experience. And you could always see in his eyes, a bit like Sherlock, he had a bigger picture than you did, and he was trying to lead you through it. And like I said, that was all based with carbon. And we did a lot on spirointerstitial, a lot of functionalization, a lot of catalysis, and various other defect structures. But I thought I'd go back to his roots and talk a little bit about the early stuff he did. So this is not work I've worked with Malcolm. But I remember once he said he was packing his bag, and he said he was off to a conference. And I asked him what he was going to, and it was a geophysics conference in some very exotic, it was like Hawaii or something like that. So I said, I didn't know he did geophysics, and it was an invited talk, he was a keynote. And it's only afterwards I found out that he did actually very influential work. And so, as I promised you fire and ice, I'll start with the fire. And the problem that he was studying is one of earthquakes. And this is the Sant Andreas fault. And this causes when the ground slides over the top of each other, and you have an energy release. And a lot of the core material there is granite, which is primarily quartz. And Malcolm comes into this story because quartz can be hydrolytically weakened. So if you take a lump of quartz that's dry in the laboratory, it's almost impossible to break it. But if you then add a relatively small amount of water to the quartz, it can absorb, and then the quartz becomes much, much weaker. And this process is called hydrolytic weakening. So if you get water seeping into the deep rock, it can actually trigger earthquakes. And Malcolm was studying dislocations in quartz. So he was looking in these early days at the dislocation core structures now for quartz. Now this was back in '85, so this was before the very, very beginning of ENCRO. So this stuff here was not done, this was done by using Keating potentials. The computing just wasn't there for DFT, and there wasn't the DFT approach, it wasn't the first tool you went to. And from the early dislocation work, they went on and they looked with Bob at hydrolytic weakening. So the idea behind this is it's a bit like, this is the elastic rebound model. This is how an earthquake would happen. You have your two plates, and you start stretching, but the quartz sticks. And then at a sudden point, there's a release. So when your strain is higher than the release energy to allow the dislocations to move, then the material slips, and you have your earthquake. And this is a slip model. So the question is, how much do you need to stretch before the dislocations finally move and the quartz deforms? And this is where the hydrolytic weakening comes in, because Dukan and Trebiet had a look at the effect on double kink formation and kink migration. And so if you take dry quartz, the kink formation is about 3 eV, and the kink migration is about 6 electron volts. But as soon as you get it wet, these drop. So for those people working in defect physics and dislocation physics, these are incredibly different values. So there's something totally different going on in the wet quartz. And Malcolm started to look at this. So I wasn't sure how much Ishiro would have covered in the morning, so I put a little introduction slide for people not working with dislocations. But a dislocation is when you've got a material and you're deforming it mechanically. And to deform it mechanically, you have to slide the atoms over each other. So this is a dislocation. It's a column of atoms, and we want to slide this to the right. So the top chunk of crystal is going to the right, the bottom chunk to the left. And to move this to the right, the way we do that is we form chemical bonds here, and then we break chemical bonds here. And you can see that now, if we do that, the dislocation will be there. So we've effectively moved the dislocation just by breaking and reforming bonds in the core of the dislocation. So how does it do it? Well, it doesn't move, break and form all those bonds simultaneously. Instead, if you look along that line, this is a bit of a kind of a mental game here, but if you look along that line, and imagine looking from above, looking down on it, then it's like a straight line of atoms. And the dislocation line moves by forming what's called a double kink. So it's just 2 neighbouring bonds break and 2 neighbouring bonds form, and you get this little kink in the line. And then you start to break and reform along the line, and it gradually moves forward. So each one of these is a single kink. So that's how a dislocation moves through a crystal. So the thing that will define how a dislocation moves is how difficult it is to form this double kink, and then how difficult it is to step these out along the line. Well, that wasn't quartz. That's a nice simple cubic crystal. Quartz is much more complicated, and this is one of those double kinks in the early stuff that Malcolm was doing in 1986. So this wasn't, I think it was at the start of his postdoc. And what they managed to find with this model, and I think a lot of Malcolm's work I really like about this, the kind of high-powered DFT is what you need to confirm, but the underlying science, you don't need that DFT. The science is there in the model, and you can see it here. This dislocation line is on here, the double kink. And if you look at these, this is silicon and this is oxygen, silicon, oxygen. And here, the silicon, oxygen, silicon is highly dilated. So by making this double kink, you stretch the bonds. And so these become open to chemical attack. And this is called a Griggs defect. So you take the silicon, oxygen, silicon, and you add water, and you stick an OH on one of the silicons and you hydrolyze the other, so you end up with 2H. Now this isn't stable in the bulk, and what Malcolm showed was that it is stable when you put it at dislocations. So what it does is where the strain is, pops open. So the water goes into the bond, pops it open and stabilizes the bond. And that's what makes it so much easier to form a double kink when you've got water there. And this was the very basic models that they built. So this kind of defect was proposed before, but isn't stable. And what Malcolm showed was that you can form it in dislocations. And that was all done with heating potentials. And then this was a paper that they published a year later, and it's a lovely paper to look at. This is where they went and did density function analysis. This is their cluster. So now we're talking about running 1,000 atoms. This is a 9-atom cluster. So they're using siloxane as their model for quartz, and then sticking water molecules into the middle of this. And that was cutting edge. And the really nice thing when you read the paper, he spends ages explaining what is density functional theory. Why is this worth doing when you can already do this with a heating potential? So he had to actually sell DFT to his audience before he actually showed the results, which, I mean, nowadays is old news. But at the time, I think this was really, really cutting edge. And then he went on, and some of these models I think are very, very beautiful. This is looking at how water actually moves through a dislocation. So the question was, you've got water catalyzing dislocation motion. How can the water get into the quartz? So this is alpha quartz, and this is just what's called a C channel. So this is the bulk crystal structure, and this is the largest cavity. And these little blobs here is the oxygen of a water molecule. So using the calculations, he was able to model how a water molecule could run through the quartz. And then this is another hole, but this is the core of a dislocation. And then, again, it's running through the alpha quartz. And this time you can see that already the oxygen path is much smoother, much smaller, and the potential surface is much smoother. So the barrier for water molecules to run through a dislocation is much lower. So this paper was the first one that suggested that actually water and oxygen, in fact, could diffuse into quartz through the dislocation cores, and not through the bulk material. And that was quite revolutionary. This is called pipe diffusion, and it's quite well understood. But I think at the time this was quite a cutting-edge idea, and people were seeing if you squeeze quartz, the water comes bubbling out of these dislocation cores. So I think this has been verified as a model. In this case, they couldn't include the hydrogen atoms, so I think it's, and there was no hydrogen bonding. The modeling was very basic. This was the size of the cluster, but they still managed to get the physics in. And something I didn't know was that he actually published a single-author Nature paper in 1992, where he took these two ideas. So he's shown how water keeps to form and keeps to move, so how dislocations rely on water, and then he showed how the dislocation core sucks water up. And there's actually different dislocation cores which they built. I think this is kind of the early Quine-plot visualization days. So these are really quite complex dislocation core structures. And he showed that these two have large enough cores for the water molecules to travel through. So in these two, the water is almost free, and that's what this section is. But when you make your double kink, then you hydrolyze with the water, and this section is a different core type. So here, the water can't go in. So he showed that the dislocation can actually act like a water pump. So you can fill the dislocation up, you can hydrolyze, you can make a kink, and then when this runs down, it'll squeeze the water and squirt the water back out. And again, you see this, when you mechanically deform the quartz, the water comes out. So this was a molecular pump in the quartz. And because he's a good scientist, when he actually had a bigger computer and a better code, and Patrick had actually sent it down to him from Newcastle, and they'd installed it, they went back and they revisited a lot of this in 2005 with Atlan, who Anna was talking about, and built much larger periodic structures, so it's kind of been confirmed since. So that was the fire, that was the earthquakes. And I won't stop on this for very long, but I did promise ice. And so what's the connection with ice? And Malcolm actually did quite a lot of ice modelling. This was about the time I started with the group. He was working with Steve Maynard. And the reason for studying ice, it was, first of all, it's exactly the same. If you want to understand how ice splits and migrates in glaciers and ice sheet flow, then you need to understand dislocation behaviour. But it's also kind of interesting that ice is a very good model for these viscoplastic anisotropy, high viscoelastic anisotropy, which is a good model for quartz. So there was actually a materials link between the way that ice deforms and the way that quartz deforms. So there was actually a kind of underlying rationale. And I wanted to show you a really beautiful slide, because I remember when I first came to Sussex, he had these lovely images. So I stole these from another paper. This isn't Malcolm's work. But all these, the complexity is really a lot of fun, because these water molecules you can twist and realign along the axes. You can realign the hydrogens, and you can change the hydrogen bonding. You can start to put in 3 hydrogens around 1 oxygen and have them tracking through it. And when you start building dislocations, like here is this double period dislocation core like in silicon, then you end up with some lovely, lovely structural complexity. But as was often the case with Malcolm, this paper is referenced enormously in the literature, and it's published in the proceedings of a journal named Sapporo, and I couldn't get it online, so unfortunately quite often the stuff isn't quite so visible. So it's something quite nice if we could, maybe if anybody's got a copy of some of these papers like this, it would be nice to be able to put them out on the web. But this was the very early ice models they were building, and again, he's using DFT with LDA, which is known to be very poor at hydrogen bonding. It's not something we'd normally consider doing, but he's managed to extract out the science despite the limitations of the tools. So that's actually all I was going to say. I could go on all afternoon, but I'd rather leave space for the other speakers. But I just wanted to say thanks to Malcolm really for sharing these ideas with us, sharing his time, sharing his enthusiasm. I learned personally from him a lot as a scientist. I think he was very rigorous. He always went right back to the original literature and beyond. And the first questions, I'd always go to him with new models and all excited and or new talks, and the first thing he'd always say is show me proof, show me the experimental proof, and I think that's a message to take with me. and he worked really hard. And I think the results are there. I think the papers that he's left behind and his scientific legacy will live for a long time. So thank you very much, Malcolm. And my last word, beat you, Calvin, because Malcolm was very involved with nanotech. He set it up in 1998. We've been running it together for 20 years. So I felt it was not out of place to put a little advert up on the screen. So for those of you who like to come to Zaragoza in the traditional nanotech slot, bank holiday weekend, end of August, and come and discuss some nanocarbon with all the rest of us, we'd be very happy to see you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Chris, can we put this, which is this light switch here? Can we just,
this one over here.
This, okay. So I've got time for 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, 4 minutes early.
Oh, that's a first. I can give you 4 more minutes on carbon.
Well, why Malcolm kind of switched from this stuff on ice? Do you know why?
Why did he switch?
Yeah,
I think
it seems as though this was a very promising avenue of research, the way you described it.
I think it's because the graphite took over, and I think he had to...
More funding, maybe.
Possibly more funding, yeah. But I think also you had to make a choice. But I mean, Natalia, we worked quite a lot on, and you did loads of stuff on hydrogenation of dislocations in diamond, and lots of the ideas that are in this work pop up elsewhere in his work. I mean, the materials change, but I think a lot of the underlying themes are there. Stone Wales defects, you see these concerted exchange defects. Dean's defects, indeed, yes. Bond rotation defects. Yes. Well, yeah, Bob Jones did a concerted exchange in silicon, and yeah, I mean, it's been around for long. But yeah, I think a lot of the ideas he transferred from one material to another.